Equal Justice Initiative is dedicated to ensuring the United States confronts its legacy of white supremacy and realigns its criminal justice system with the nation's fundamental guarantee of true justice for all.
Today, there are more African Americans in prison or jail, on probation or on parole, than there were enslaved in 1850.
There are many people who believe that last night the state executed an innocent man.
We are number one in the world when it comes to incarceration.
That we have an overly punitive and racially discriminatory system.
Mass incarceration makes our country worse off, and we need to do something about it.
I think in this country we have been held back by our history of racial inequality. You say the word race in America and people get nervous. You say the word racial justice and people start looking for the nearest exit. We've been burdened by this legacy, all of us, and the costs are immeasurable. You're 6 times more likely to go to prison for committing the same offense if you're a black man versus a white man. We have these horrific disparities when it comes to sentencing, from the death penalty to the lowest level drug crimes. And this racialized use of punishment is a feature of the American criminal justice system that must be confronted. The broader community of clients come to us when they present legal problems that we can take on, that we might be able to help them, but by helping them, also help hundreds, sometimes thousands of other people at the same time.
To condemn a child of 13 or 14 or to any juvenile to die in prison is cruel, it's indecent, and cannot be reconciled with our principles and values.
We'll represent a 9-year-old who's facing adult prosecution, but we'll do that in a way that's designed to create a minimum age for trying children as adults so that no 9-year-old will ever be in that situation again.
What's your son's name? Okay, and where is he incarcerated?
We prioritize people who've been sentenced to death.
All of this time, I kept wondering, how did I get where I'm at? How did I end up on death row for a crime that I didn't commit?
Hinton lived more than half his life inside a cage, a 5-by-7 cell.
And so when Mr. Stevenson came, for the first time, I felt that somebody was working on my behalf that believed in me.
Just a few weeks ago, the state of Alabama dropped the case after a new look at the evidence could not match the bullets to the gun, and Hinton was released.
How grateful I am to EJI for sticking by me and giving me my life back.
Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Lord.
The question of the death penalty for me has never been, do people deserve to die for the crimes they commit? The question is, do we deserve to kill? I'm really proud of the fact that we've had 115 people on death row get removed from death row after we were able to prove wrongful convictions or unfair sentences. And we've now seen 8 states have repealed the death penalty in the last 8 years. That's largely what we've been doing. We've been standing when people said sit down on behalf of the condemned and the incarcerated and the wrongly accused. We've been speaking with other people who have been saying, be quiet when it comes to our history of racial inequality. But the fruits of that is, I think, a more hopeful society. A society a little bit closer to ending mass incarceration, to ending the death penalty, to ending the abuse of children in our criminal justice system, and maybe to turning the corner on our legacy of racial inequality and oppression.
Justice Initiative, Bryan Stevenson.
Thank you. In 1972, there were 300,000 people in jails and prisons in the United States. Today, there are 2.3 million. We have 8 million people under the control of the criminal justice system. The United States now has the highest rate of incarceration in the world. We have 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's imprisoned. There are 3,000 people awaiting execution. There are tens of thousands of people who've been sentenced to die in prison, some as young as 13 years of age. We have a criminal justice system in America, like too many systems across the world, that treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent. Wealth, not culpability, shapes outcomes. So I am enormously honored that you would invite someone like me, who does the work that I do, into this community. Because inviting me and welcoming me, you are welcoming a community of people who believe really simple things. We believe that each person is more than the worst thing that they've ever done. I believe when someone tells a lie, they're not just a liar. I believe when someone takes something, they're not just a thief. I think even if you kill someone, you are not just a killer, and justice requires that we understand the other things that people are. And welcoming me, you're welcoming people who believe that the opposite of poverty is not wealth. I think in America and too many places across the world, I don't believe the opposite of poverty is wealth. I believe the opposite of poverty is justice. And if we want to deconstruct poverty, we've got to do justice. And finally, in welcoming me, you welcome a community of people who believe that we have to judge our commitment to social change and progress. We have to judge how we're doing on this planet, not by looking at how we treat the rich and the powerful and the privileged. We have to judge how we're doing by looking at the poor, the incarcerated, and the marginalized. It's in that metric that we see where we're doing. And I wanted to say, to students who are watching, I want you to do well in school, but I want you to understand that your grades do not measure your capacity to change the world. To people who are watching out there, I want you to do well. I want you to have good incomes, but don't ever think your income is going to limit your capacity to change the world. There is a different metric system for those of us who are trying to do justice. It was taught to me by an older man. I was giving a talk in a church one day, and this older man came into the church. He was in a wheelchair, older black man. And the whole time I was talking, he was looking at me with this very stern, almost angry look on his face. And I couldn't figure out why was he looking at me so angrily. And I kept looking at him. He was sort of distracting me. And I got through the talk, and people came up. They were very nice and appropriate. But that man kept sitting in the back staring at me. And he got a young kid to wheel him up to the front of the church. And when he got in front of me, he put his hand up and he said, "Do you know what you're doing?" And I stood there and I just stared at him. And then this older man looked at me again. And he said, "Do you know what you're doing?" And I stepped back and I mumbled something. I don't even remember what I said. And then he asked me one last time. He said, "Do you know what you're doing?" And then he looked at me and he said, "I'm going to tell you what you're doing." And then this older man looked at me and he said, "You're beating the drum for justice. You keep beating the drum for justice." And I was so moved. I was also deeply relieved because I just didn't know. And then he grabbed me by my jacket and he pulled me into his wheelchair. He said, "Come here, come here, come here, I'm going to show you something." And this older man turned his head and he showed me a scar. He said, "You see this scar I have behind my right ear?" He says, "I got that scar in Greene County, Alabama in 1963, trying to fight for civil rights and registering people to vote." And then he turned his head. He said, "You see this cut?" He said, "I got that cut in Philadelphia, Mississippi, fighting for civil rights, trying to register people to vote." Then he turned his head. He said, "You see this dark spot?" He said, "That's my bruise. I got my bruise in Birmingham, Alabama, 1965, fighting for civil rights, trying to register people to vote." He said, "I'm going to tell you something, young man." He said, "People look at me and they think I'm some old man sitting in a wheelchair covered with cuts and bruises and scars, but I'm going to tell you something." He said, "These aren't my cuts. These aren't my bruises. These aren't my scars." He said, "These are my medals of honor." And I will tell you, as someone who started his education in the segregated colored school in the South, as someone who is the child of parents who had to suffer the daily humiliations of Jim Crow and segregation, as someone who is the grandson who had to flee lynching and terrorism in the American South, as the great-grandson of people who were enslaved, I will tell you, I sometimes feel scarred by America's history of racial injustice. As someone who goes into jails and prisons, I will tell you, I sometimes feel bruised by this knowledge that I have, that we have more innocent people in our jails and prisons today than we've ever had in our history. As someone who has to feel and see the presumption of dangerousness and guilt that follows Black and brown people in America, I will tell you that you have done something extraordinary for me today, because today you have turned my cuts, my scars, my bruises, and all of us who fight for justice across the world into medals of honor. And for that, I am enormously grateful. Thank you so, so much.